What's up, guys? It's James from Lucrative MMA, and I'm back to drop some more knowledge on you. Today, I'm back for the 6th episode of the Lucrative MMA Betting Podcast. We had a little hiatus, about a 1 to 2 week hiatus. I've just been really busy breaking down lots of fights. As you guys know, I do this as a job. So every single week I watch fights, multiple fights. I'm watching over probably about 200 fights every single month. I haven't done the maths, but I've just been a little bit busy. So we didn't do the podcast for 2 weeks, but I have still been very active on my YouTube channel. And if any of you don't follow me on there, definitely go on there because I've been putting out preliminary card and main card breakdowns over the last 2 weeks since the podcast has been away, and obviously for the last 2 months as well. But I thought I'd come back today because this is a pretty decent card. You know, UFC 261, it's a pay-per-view, so it's pretty big because we got 3 title fights on this card. I will say that the preliminary card is a little bit of a letdown, so the fights on there are not very high level. There's quite a few fighters making their UFC debuts or like their second or third UFC fights. Not very high level at the beginning of the card, but obviously they kind of salvaged that with the last 3 fights on the card. Not so much the main event, to be honest, Usman Masvidal. Obviously, I am excited for that. I'm excited for almost every single UFC fight ever, but it's probably one of the least exciting main events that, or at least I've been excited for in a long time. So I'm going to be breaking down a few different aspects of the card. If you guys don't know, if you haven't listened to this podcast before, this is a betting podcast. It's not just an MMA or UFC podcast. I like watching MMA, but what I like doing more than watching MMA is making money from watching MMA. And I've been able to do that for multiple years now. Me and my members have won 6 out of the last 7 weekends. We've profited every single weekend. We had 1 weekend out of them 7 where we didn't profit, but we only lost 0.1 unit. So it's basically a break-even weekend. So we've been on an amazing run, and I'm looking to continue that this weekend. We already have about 7 or 8 bets locked in for this UFC card. And as always, if you did want to sign up and get all of them bets, as well as all of the bets for the upcoming cards, you can go to my website, lucrativemmabetting.com, and you can sign up for a membership package. But without further ado, let's get into that. If you haven't listened to this podcast before, I'm going to be speaking about the most exciting fight on the card. I'm going to be speaking about the most inaccurate betting line on the card. And I'm going to be speaking about the main event, right? And I'm going to be speaking about all of these fights from a betting perspective. So we'll start with the most exciting fight on the card. Now, it's always a struggle for me to pick the most exciting fight on the card because usually in the UFC cards, it's not like boxing where it's just top heavy and the rest of the cards kind of shit. in the UFC, in MMA in general, but of course with the UFC, the top MMA promotion in the world, most of the time they kind of pack out their cards, and there's at least 3 or 4 cards usually in the running for the most exciting fight on the card for me. So, there's multiple fights that I was going to pick. One of them was Brendan Allen versus Carl Roberson. I was thinking of picking that fight. Obviously, I think the flyweight fight between Valentina Shevchenko and Jessica Andrade is going to be a great fight. But I've decided to go for the UFC strawweight championship fight, which is between Weili Zhang and Rose Namajunas. Now, I guess what this has, which the other 2 fights I mentioned don't necessarily have, is there's a little bit of I wouldn't call it back and forth. I wouldn't even really call it beef too much, but there's a little bit more of a story to this fight than the Shevchenko Andrade or the Brendan Allen Roberson fight, right? Obviously, it mainly started, and I think it's only really because Rose Namajunas comes out a few weeks ago, whenever it was, saying that she is, because she's half Lithuanian or part Lithuanian, or her heritage comes from Lithuania, she is very much against communism, and China is pretty much a communist country, right? And obviously Weili Zhang comes from China. So Rose Namajunas come out and said a slogan like "Better dead than red," which was used quite a while ago, basically denouncing communism. And I'm not going to get into the politics of the fight, but since she come out saying that, there's been a lot of, back and forth. Not between the two, but just in general, in the MMA community, in the media, on, if she should have said them things. what this fight means, all of that sort of stuff. So there is a backstory to this, right? Like, so I guess that kind of is baked into why I'm saying this is the most exciting fight on the card. But at the end of the day, I just believe that stylistically, these girls match up very well. And I think it's going to be an absolute mad fight, to be honest, for as long as it lasts. And I can say that I will give you my prediction at the end, but it's very possible this fight doesn't go all 5. Weili Zhang is a monster. She's only lost 1 fight, and that happened to be a debut. And since then, she's gone on a 21-fight winning streak, taking out girls like Jessica Andrade, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Tisha Torres. So, she's on a crazy run. 21-fight winning streak. It's probably one of the best winning streaks in the whole of MMA history, really, if you break it down, especially because she has fought at that top level yet. Rose Namajunas, she's only 9-4, so she doesn't have as much experience, but she's actually got more UFC experience, which is quite interesting, right? On the Chinese regional scene, the MMA scene in China, they often do have multiple fights, and the competition isn't that great. So a lot of the times they can have more fights than other countries because they're not as banged up from the fights, because the competition is not as good as it is in other countries, in a lot of other countries. So in the American regional scene, you're not really going to be having fights every 2 months, but in the Chinese regional scene, you kind of can do that because you'll probably be winning and taking a lot less damage than some of these other circuits around the world. So, it's kind of interesting that, Rose Namajunas has like almost half the fights Zhang does, but she has quite a bit more UFC experience. They've both been champions. Rose Namajunas obviously had the strawweight belt not too long ago, and now Zhang is a champion. They've both been 5 rounds. So, they've both got solid experience, and they're both at the top of the division. And I can't wait for this fight, right? The reason I call it the most exciting fight also is, there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is because probably the most exciting UFC strawweight fight we've ever seen before, right, was between Weili Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and that was in Weili's last fight, right? So Weili is already basically locked in the most exciting UFC strawweight fight of all time, and it was a 5-round title fight, and that was her last fight. So she's coming in again against another fighter who had a very exciting 5-round strawweight title fight, which was Rose Namajunas when she fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So the two commonalities in them were obviously Joanna Jędrzejczyk, right? But I think the way these girls match up is pretty similar to them fights that I just spoke of with Jędrzejczyk, in the fact that they're probably going to be stand-up fights. Now, I could see the wrestling being mixed in by either girl here, but I think for the most part, we're going to see a kickboxing match for 25 minutes. As I said, it might not last that long, but for as long as it does last, I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. So I'll just go into how this fight, breaks down and my prediction of the fight. So this was kind of a hard one for me to pick because I do rate Zhang, right? She's a very high-level fighter. She has extreme power. So even if she's not winning on the, strike output, which she didn't actually win in her last fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Jędrzejczyk outstruck her. She's probably going to be winning on the optics, right? So what the judges see optically through their eyes, because Zhang hits hard as fuck. She's probably one of the hardest hitters in the division. So even if you hit her 3 or 4 times, she only needs to hit you 1 time to kind of counteract the 3 or 4 shots that she's just took. And that's kind of what happened in our last fight, right? That fight was super close. It was a split decision. One judge scored it for Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And you could say that it's possible that the reason that Zhang won that fight was just because of the optic damage she caused on Jędrzejczyk. So Jędrzejczyk had a huge hematoma on her head. Everyone knows about that by now. If you haven't seen it, you can go and search it up. Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And don't ask me how to spell that one. But Joanna Jędrzejczyk, hematoma, or versus Weili Zhang. And you will see the crazy hematoma she had on her head, right? If you don't know what hematoma is, it's basically when a part of your body swells up because of repeated damage, right? And that's what happened. Zhang hit young Jacek so many times or hard enough that her face just completely swelled up. And that could have swayed the judge's decision, in the fight. If a round is super close, but one fighter, their face is destroyed, they're bleeding, they've got huge hematoma, more than likely the judges will go with the fighter who caused that damage, right? Because the number one criteria in MMA scoring, even though it seems like the judges don't even know the criteria themselves these days, but the number one criteria actually is damage, right? So if a fight's close, back and forth, even if Weili Zhang's getting a little bit outstruck, if she does more damage, she could win that fight or win that round on the judges' scorecards. So I'm definitely going to give Zhang the optics advantage in this fight, and it's probably going to be like that in every single one of our fights in the strawweight division, so she's always going to have that advantage. Where I give Rose the advantage, I give Rose the advantage in the boxing and the footwork. I think Rose has better boxing. I don't think she has the same power, as I've said, and that can counteract the technique of Rose, but I do think Rose's boxing is better. She comes with uppercuts, hooks. She's got a beautiful jab, one of the best jabs in the strawweight division, probably one of the best jabs in the women's division overall, in general. And then I do give her the advantage in the footwork, so her footwork is pretty beautiful, but she can slow down, as we saw her slow down in her last fight against Jessica Andrade. And then that's when the footwork doesn't, it doesn't shine through as much as it does in the earlier rounds. But I am going to let her off the hook in that last fight. I think the reason she slowed down is because Jessica Andrade is such a bull and she just constantly comes forward. And I don't think Weili Zhang puts the same pressure on our opponents. Now, Weili Zhang definitely stands in the middle and plants her feet, but she doesn't come forward swinging huge bombs like Andrade does. And if you're constantly moving backwards, that tires you out more than if you're constantly moving forwards, right? So I don't think Zhang's going to put that same amount of pressure on Namajunas, but it's not a 3-round fight. It's a 5-round fight. So she definitely could succumb to that pressure when it gets to the 4th and 5th round. She kind of succumb to the pressure in the 3rd round with Andrade. I don't think it's going to be that soon, but I am leaning that Zhang probably is able to wear her down in a later round. So I do think Rose is going to start very strong in this fight. I think she may even win the 1st round. I think she may even win the 2nd round. I just feel like Zhang is so tough that she's not going to be deterred by Namajunas' striking or power. Now, I do think Namajunas has pretty solid power, but it's not going to be enough to deter Weili Zhang, man. Weili Zhang's face after that Yan Jacek fight was basically fine. I mean, she definitely was bleeding. She had some swelling on her eyes. I shouldn't say that, but just compared to Joanna Jacek, it was not even comparable, and obviously in her fight before that, Weili Zhang's fight against Andrade, she just took her out real soon. So I think Weili Zhang can take punishment. That's what I'm trying to say, right? She definitely can take punishment well. And even if Namajunas is clipping her early, I don't think she's going to get deterred. I feel like when Namajunas fought Andrade, she hurt her multiple times in that fight, in the first fight and in the second fight. And although Andrade wasn't deterred, which I don't think Weili Zhang's going to be, I feel like if they were 5-round fights, or if the last fight with Namajunas and Andrade was a 5-round fight, Andrade possibly could have won that fight because she did seem to be coming on very strong in the 5th round. Now, we can't just say because she come on strong in the 3rd round that she was going to win the fight, because at the end of the day, she was 2-1 down in rounds. And who knows? Namajunas could have got a 2nd win in that 4th round. Maybe Andrade just went balls to the wall because she knew it was the last round. Maybe she wouldn't have done that in the 5th round fight. There's so many factors that go into that, because I do see a lot of people saying, oh, yeah, Weili Zhang's just going to get to Namajunas because Andrade almost got to her, but time ran out. But there's so many factors that go into that. You can't just make a huge assumption and say that, yeah, Andrade was definitely going to get to her, or Andrade was winning that. Like, you can't say that, right? Because of the reasons I just mentioned. But ironically, I do still agree with the notion that Weili Zhang is going to take over in the later portion of that fight. And it's not only because I saw Andrade put on her in that 3rd round. It's just because I just think that's how the fight's going to go. Multiple reasons. That is one of the reasons, the Andrade reason, but also because I saw Weili Zhang get more comfortable in them later rounds against Joanna. Also, she's been 5 rounds now, so and that was her first time ever going 5 rounds in her last fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So Zhang's going to definitely be able to, she just got that 5-round experience. It's absolutely invaluable. Jędrzejczyk had multiple 5 rounds experience going into that fight. So just Zhang getting them 25 minutes in with probably one of the best of the division of all time, probably the strawweight queen at the moment, of all time. If the world was to end now, you'd probably say Joanna was the greatest strawweight of all time. Even though Namajunas beat her twice, I know that. Probably going to get some comeback there. But anyway, so I feel like Zhang is going to be able to pace herself better this time. I feel like she's going to be able to know she can go 5 rounds this time. Look, there's so much benefits of going 5 rounds at least once if you're having another 5-round fight. I'm not going to go into all the benefits now, but that is definitely a big plus on the side of Zhang. And if she looked that good in her last fight, how's she going to look good how's she going to look in this fight? And I was watching UFC countdown, right? UFC 261 countdown. And a lot of times I like to make this is quite a funny thing. I like to make my bets and make my plays and send them out to my members before I watch the UFC 261 countdown sometimes, right? Or the UFC countdowns. Now, not all the time. It kind of just depends when I'm free and what I'm feeling like in my life. But there was a period of time, I should say, where I didn't watch the countdowns or I didn't watch much media before I made the bets, right? Because they can influence your decisions a lot of time. And I'll tell you one way they can, right? When I was watching UFC 261 countdown the other day, it basically had it had a portion of the countdown on Weili Zhang, and it was talking about how Zhang was really Zhang was really compromised going into that Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight, right? Apparently, because that was during the midst of the pandemic around the world, she had to quarantine in a couple of places. She had to take like 3 or 4 flights to get to the US. So she went to Thailand for a while. Then she had to stay somewhere else. Then she had to come to the US. So her diet was fucked up. Her sleep pattern was fucked up. Her weight cutting wasn't ideal. So, she had all of these problems going into the fight, right? And she still performed that well. Now, if you watch this fight before you make your bets, right, you might be like, wow, like it might influence your decision. You might think, wow, so Zhang was, she had to go through all of these problems before the fight. She's going to be way better this time, right? Let me bet Zhang because she's going to be even better. The thing about that is that there's so much of outside of the octagon stuff happening to every fighter in every camp. It's so hard to know how much to factor that in to your betting capping, right? And I basically just don't cap it at all. Now, there are things that I do take on board and they may influence my decision like maybe 1% to 2%, but they're not going to influence my decision much because you can get carried away with that. And I did used to get carried away with that when I first started betting on this game. I used to get carried away with the outside of the octagon stuff. But what you guys should be doing if you're betting on MMA is basing 90% plus of your decision of who you're going to bet on the stylistic matchup on the fight. I.e., how do these fighters break down on tape? When I'm watching film on these fighters, when I'm watching tape, how do they look? Don't worry about if they had a bad weight cut, if they had jet lag, if they had an injury going into the fight, if their fucking family, their mother died. Like, don't worry about most of that shit, right? Now, when you're at an advanced level and you can do it with no emotions, then yeah, you can factor it in 1%, 2%. But even at that level, it still doesn't take over the main aspect of capping and betting and winning on MMA fights, which is how they look on film. Because at the end of the day, yeah, Zhang, she may have had a bad weight cut. She may have had jet lag. She may have had to quarantine. But the thing is, on the other side, you don't know what went on in Joanna Jędrzejczyk's camp. You just don't know, right? You don't know. She could have had a terrible injury going into that fight that she didn't mention in camp. Like, you don't know, right? So just be careful there, because I used to get carried away with it, and some people can too. Anyway, I'll go back to the fight. So look, I've spoke about the fight enough, man. So my final prediction, I guess, is that Namajunas is going to start good. She's probably going to be piecing Zhang up. I do think she's got a better technique in the striking. But I do think Zhang's probably going to come on in them later rounds, and she's going to wear Rose out just with the pure physicality, just with the pure power. I think Zhang is live for a 4th or 5th round knockout. I was looking at playing them props, but then I went back and watched the Rose versus Jędrzejczyk fight 2, and Rose was looking good in them last rounds. So, but I don't think she's going to be hit with the ferociousness that she will be hit with Zhang. So, look, you definitely could see me play the 4th and 5th round props. I mean, if you just chuck 0.2 units on them, it's never a bad bet. I mean, I had 0.33 units on Peter Yan to finish Aljamain Sterling in round 4 and round 5, and we all know how that one went. It looked like he was going to get the 4th or 5th round finish, and then so that was upsetting. But I definitely don't regret that bet, and if I put it on here, even if it loses, I probably won't regret that bet, just because I can see it as a probable outcome. But I guess the most probable outcome would, instead of picking a specific round, would be that this fight goes to decision, and I'm going to say, Zhang gets a close 48-47 decision win. But, man, I wouldn't be surprised if Namajunas wins this fight, because, as I say, I do rate Namajunas' pure kickboxing skills, shall we say, at a higher level than Weili Zhang. But Weili Zhang has that physicality. She has that power. She probably has better durability, even though Rose is durable as fuck. She's fresher in a way, even though she's had less fights. I feel like I don't know whether maybe that's just because she's kind of like a new emerging face, but I feel like Namajunas has been in a lot more wars than Zhang. I mean, Zhang's only ever war was basically her last fight. So Namajunas has been in multiple wars. She got knocked unconscious by Jessica Andrade with probably one of the worst knockouts we've ever seen. She slammed on her neck. That looked dangerous. It looked like it could be career ending when we saw it live. She obviously went to war with Jędrzejczyk. She went to war with Andrade in her last fight in the rematch. She's been 5 rounds with Paige, even though she was dominating that fight. But she's been through the ringer, whereas Zhang's kind of more fresh. So I do feel like later down the stretch in this fight, Zhang could probably take over. So that's my prediction. My prediction is My prediction is Weili Zhang to get a 4th round TKO. That is my final prediction. All right. So we spoke about the most exciting fight on the card. Now we're going to be speaking about the most inaccurate betting line on the card. And look, I don't want to come out and say this is the most inaccurate betting line, because I think there's a couple of inaccurate betting lines, right? And it's hard to judge how inaccurate they are and what's the most inaccurate line. But I'm just going to go with a money line play, because I do think it's definitely inaccurate. And I'll go over why. Obviously, I'm a sports bettor, right? So what I aim to do every single week when I bet on MMA, which is the only sport I bet on, sometimes I have a little flutter on the boxing if I have a good read on it. But, 99% of my plays are on MMA, because that is where I have an edge in the market. And that's where I've proven to have an edge in the market over the last 3-4 years. So that's the only sport I bet on. So every single week, what I do is I look at the betting market, right? I look at the lines and I try to find inefficiencies on the market. That's the only way you'll ever win money in sports betting, okay? There's only one strategy that wins money in sports betting, and that is basically finding inefficiencies in the betting line. It's not picking winners, okay? It's not finding out who's got a better skill set than the other fighter and picking that fighter. It's nothing to do with that. Obviously, that comes into it, but at the end of the day, you need to be finding inefficiencies in the betting line. And what I mean by finding inefficiencies in the betting line is by finding betting odds that are not, quote unquote, what's called true odds. So, for example, behind every betting line, okay, lies a probability. And you can actually see that here with the odds mug by Z's MMA. If you go to Z's MMA Twitter, you can buy this odds mug on his link in a bio. And if you can see here, right, it says minus 400 equals 80%, right? And what that basically means is if you see a betting line saying minus 400, that means that whatever betting line that betting line represents, that event has an 80% probability of happening. So, for example, I know Kamaru Usman is a minus 400 favorite this weekend, right? And obviously, as we've said, minus 400 means that Kamaru Usman should win 80% of the time. So, if they are the true odds, and if Kamaru Usman actually would win this fight 80% of the time, then you shouldn't be betting on it, even if you think that Kamaru Usman's going to win the fight. Because over the long term, if you bet on this all the time, he's only ever going to win 80% of the time, right? If they are actually the true odds. And if he does that, you're only going to win 80% of your bets. And if you're flat staking and putting the same stake on this bet every single time, then you're only going to break even, right? So what you want to be doing in order to find inefficiencies in the betting market is that if it says Kamaru Usman is actually is minus 400, but you think that he should actually be minus 600 and he should have more than 80% chance of winning this fight, then you should be betting it, right? So that's what you have to do to win money in sports betting long term. And sorry for the rant there. I just wanted to get into that quickly before I mention the most inaccurate betting line on the card, because I want you to know exactly what I mean by most inaccurate. Because I'm going to pick an underdog here, right? And I don't necessarily think he's going to win. Actually, I capped this fight as a 50-50 fight, but I'm still going to bet this line because I think it's inaccurate. So even though I don't necessarily think the fight is going to win, I think it's 50-50. Anyone could win. I'm still going to put my money on it because long term, that's how you win money. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and bet these lines that are slightly off, or if a fighter has a 10% chance of winning a fight, but their line says 5%. I'm not saying bet that because there's lots of different philosophies behind betting. But at the end of the day, the only philosophy that should be behind every philosophy is that you need to be finding the true odds and you need to be looking at betting lines in terms of probability, not just who's going to win the fight. Okay, so the moment you've all been waiting for. Or maybe not, I don't know. But probably you just wanted to hear that rant finish. So probably the moment you've all been waiting for, me to finish that rant and go in and tell you the most inaccurate betting line on the card, which is, I think, the fight between Zhu Rong and Rodrigo Vargas. So at the moment, you've got Zhu Rong as a minus 250 favorite against Rodrigo Vargas as a plus 200 favorite. So if we check here, we won't be able to check on this mug because I've only got favorites, but basically, they've got Rodrigo Vargas as a plus 200 underdog, right? And a plus 200 underdog basically means, if you convert it to probability, as I mentioned, that he's got a 33% chance of winning this fight. And I have to be honest with you guys, after watching tape on this fight, I don't see how you can say he's only got a 33% chance of winning this fight. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that he's probably got a 50% chance of winning this fight. I think this fight is a pure 50-50. So if you're going to give me plus 200, if you're going to say that this fighter wins 33% of the time, and I'm saying he wins 50% of the time, I'm saying that there's a 17% edge I'm getting on the bookmakers there. I think I'm getting a 17% edge, which is a huge edge, right? Usually when I'm having bets, I don't get 17% edges, not on money lines, because at the end of the day, the bookmakers are not stupid and they usually price money lines specifically fairly accurately. I don't think they've done that here. Now, I could be wrong because there's not much film that I can find on his opponent, Zhu Rong. So maybe his opponent's made a lot of improvements. Maybe he'll come out here and fuck up Rodrigo Vargas. But from what I can see on tape, it's a close fight and it can go either way. So I'll just get into the fight a little bit, just the stylistics of the fight. So Zhu Rong is coming in on his UFC debut. He's 17-3, so it's a good record. But as I mentioned, it's on the regional scene in China. And as I mentioned with Weili Zhang, they do have lots of fights in China. It doesn't necessarily mean they're at a super high level, even if they've got a super high level record, right? And which is what he does. He's got 17-3 record. He's coming in against Rodrigo Vargas, who's got an 11-4 record. But Rodrigo Vargas has UFC experience, and he did lose 2 fights in the UFC. But one of the fights he lost, which was his last fight, I believe, against Brock Weaver, it did look like he was winning that fight until he did an illegal knee and Brock Weaver couldn't continue. And so he got DQ'd and he lost that fight. So Rodrigo Vargas comes out and, he's not the greatest fighter, man. I'm not super confident laying my money with him, right? I'm not doing it because I think he's going to win the fight. As I mentioned, I'm not doing it because I really like to put my money on him because he's like such a good fighter or he's got great skill set. I'm just doing it because I think the line is off, man. And I have to make the bookies pay if the actual line is off. And we'll find out on the weekend, right? He's a plus 200 underdog. So I don't expect too much from him. But what I do expect and what I'm pretty sure I'll get, unless he gets knocked out in the first exchange, is that he will attempt takedowns, right? He will throw out volume. He will come forward. He doesn't take a step back. And against Zhu Rong, I feel like that's kind of what you need to beat him. So when I'm looking at tape on Zhu Rong, he's got decent striking. He's got good power. And that's what could win him this fight. He could catch Rodrigo Vargas coming in with something clean because I do think Vargas leaves his chin up in the air. I do think his striking defense when he's moving forward is pretty poor. And if he walks forward on Rong, which he will have to do in order to win this fight, and it's what he does every fight anyway, I feel like he's definitely open to be countered, right? But that's kind of the only way I see Rong hitting this, winning this fight, is if he is able to counter Vargas and put him out, which is a possibility, or if he's able to consistently counter him and hurt him, right? I just feel like, though, if he does hurt him, he'll probably put him out. So if he doesn't put him out, I feel like Vargas is going to eventually get hold of Rong, and I think he's going to be able to take him down, right? Vargas is decent at takedowns. He's not got the worst wrestling in the world, and I can at least bank on him to attempt takedowns consistently. And I've seen Zhu Rong get taken down a couple of times on the regional scene, and he doesn't look particularly great at getting back to his feet. He looks pretty physical, but that physicality doesn't really stop him from getting taken down. So look, I'm not going to go too deep into this fight. As I say, there's not too much tape out there on Zhu Rong, so he could come out here and embarrass me, be very improved from his regional tape, and knock out Vargas in the first round. But you also have to factor in that this is Zhu Rong's UFC debut, so that definitely goes a long way. I told you guys that I don't factor in outside of the octagon stuff much, but fighters fighting on their UFC debut, I definitely do factor that in. Now, it's not like 10%, 15%. How I factor in is going to change my opinion by 10%. But, I do factor in the UFC debut at a fairly substantial rate because fighters always look good, or a lot of the time when fighters come to the UFC, they always look good on the regional scene, but they just don't replicate it in the UFC. And if they do replicate it in the UFC, a lot of times they don't replicate it on their UFC debut. Loads of fighters have lost on their UFC debut, I made a video about it where I went through all the fighters who are lost on their UFC debut. And I mean, it's a lot of fighters, man. It's a lot of high-level fighters as well. So, you have to factor that in as well. Vargas has been there, done that in the UFC. And, I mean, his career's on the line. He's lost 2 in a row, even though one shouldn't have been a loss. So, man, I just feel like Vargas can make this fight close. Okay, that's what it really comes down to. I feel like this is a 50-50 fight. And if you're giving me Vargas at plus 200, I have to take the shot. I'm a sports bettor. I'm looking for market inefficiencies. And I think this is an inefficiency in the market, guys. So I'm going with Rodrigo Vargas. I'm putting a 1-unit shot on him at plus 200. If it wins, I cash 2 units. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if either of these fighters wins. 50-50 fight, as I said. And it will look like kind of a bad bet if Zhu Rong does win, because I feel like if Zhu Rong wins, it's probably going to be by a knockout. And it probably is going to be early as well. So it could look like a terrible bet, but, we won't know until we see this fight played out 100 times whether it is a terrible bet. Unless it goes 15 minutes and he just completely gets dominated, then we will know. But yeah, man, I feel like this fight's going to be close. So that's why I'm betting on a plus 200 line here. Okay. The final aspect of it's not an aspect, is it? It's the final segment, the final segment of the podcast. It's the main event, right? Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. Now, look, I'm not too excited to talk about this fight. We've seen the fight. We know how the fight plays out. We saw it over 5 rounds, which means we have a better idea on how the fight plays out than if we had only seen it in the first round, if we had seen the first round knockout. But at the end of the day, I still am kind of excited for the fight. And I was thinking about it yesterday and I was like, damn, I'm actually getting kind of excited for this fight now. I wasn't as excited before. But look, I feel like I feel like Usman's got Masvidal covered everywhere, really. Obviously, I don't mean he's going to beat him everywhere. I mean, Masvidal, if this is a kickboxing match, Masvidal wins that fight, and I don't think anyone really disagrees with me there. But in an MMA match, he's basically got him covered everywhere. You know, Usman's got a good jab. He should probably be able to keep Masvidal away on the feet enough for him to get his wrestling going. Usman's a very tough guy. We did see him get dropped in the first round by Gilbert Burns, and I actually bet Gilbert Burns to win in round one at something crazy like plus 1,200 in that fight, because I knew Gilbert Burns could definitely trouble Usman early. I don't think anyone called that, but I mean, he almost stopped him in the first round. I bet that as a hedge to cover my over bet in that fight, which also cashed. It was over 1.5. I thought the only way it's not going over 1.5 is, you know, if Burns hits him early, which is possible. And yeah, basically why I bring that up is to say that Masvidal is going to be live early, but I feel like Usman's just going to take over, man. I mean, he did it in the last fight, right? So like Masvidal could have won that first round. Masvidal probably won the first round in their last fight, right? It was a close round, but I'll probably edge it to Masvidal. But that's all Masvidal had, man. After that, he lost every single round on every single judge's scorecard. And he actually lost every single round of the fight on every judge's scorecard except for one judge. That one judge scored the first round to Masvidal. So, look, man, I feel like Masvidal is going to come out early. He's going to come out hard. He's going to fade. Usman's going to wear him down. I don't think he's going to be able to put Masvidal away. I know a lot of people are saying that he will get Masvidal out of there this time. I know Usman himself is saying that he's looking for the knockout this time, but we hear that all the time, right? Fighters always come out and say, this time I'm looking for the knockout. This time I'm going to knock him out. Or not necessarily this time, but just in general, they always talk about knockouts, right? They're like, yeah, I'm going to knock him out. I'm not letting this one go the distance. When you're in there and another guy's trying to take your head off and it's an MMA fight, like a lot of the times you can't do exactly what you said you're going to do, right? So look, Usman's live for the finish in the later rounds. He definitely is going to wear him down. Masvidal could be fucked come rounds 4-5, but Masvidal seemed fine in the 5-round fight last time out. And I suspect he's going to be able to withstand the damage that Usman's going to put out on him. Usman's not necessarily a quote-unquote damaging fighter. Maybe he has stepped up his game recently, did stop Colby, did stop Gilbert, but I don't think they are as tough as Masvidal. And he stopped Colby with strikes, but he's not going to stop Masvidal on the feet with strikes. Now, he may stop him on the feet with strikes after he's tired and gassed out, but he's not going to get as much damage off as he could in the Colby fight because it's not going to be a striking fight, right? Usman's going to have him up against the cage a lot of the time. Usman's going to take him down to his butt a lot of the time. And I don't think he's going to be able to put the offense that he needs to get Masvidal out of there unless they're on the feet. And if they're on the feet, Masvidal is probably going to win that fight. So he's not going to be on the feet for an extended period of time. So anyway, I feel like Usman's going to basically dominate this fight. I think we could see another 50-45. If Masvidal wins, it's likely going to be early. It's going to likely be with something crazy like a huge flying knee or a head kick or something like that, a knee to the face in the clinch, or like it's going to be kind of an unlikely outcome. If Masvidal does win, it's probably going to win early. I don't think he can win a decision here. I mean, how are you going to tell? I don't think anyone can tell me. I don't think anyone can make a good argument for Masvidal winning 3 out of the 5 rounds here. I mean, it's highly unlikely that he's going to be able to rack up winning minutes in this fight. So his only path to victory is a knockout, in my opinion. And Usman's tough, man. I know he got hurt by Burns in their last fight, but that shot probably would have put out most of the welterweight division. We saw Burns dead Damian Maia with a similar shot. But Burns has definitely got power. He's built like a brick. He's got no neck. He's got crazy traps. He's a tank, so he's definitely got power. And Usman, he ate that, He definitely did look wobbled, but he ate that, and he carried on coming, and he finished Burns. So I think Usman is a very, very tough guy, and I just feel like he's going to be able to dominate Masvidal, man. I don't really have too much to say about this fight. We've seen the fight already. I feel like it's going to be very, very, very similar to the first fight. Now, a lot of times rematches are quite different than the first fight. A lot of times, if a rematch happens, I'll bet on the opposite outcome. And by what I mean by opposite outcome is like if a fight goes to decision the first time, a lot of times I might bet the knockout in the next fight. But at the end of the day, I just see this fight going almost identical to the first fight. So I'm not going to go into it anymore, man. I think Kamaru Usman's going to win via decision. That's my bet, and that's my prediction. I got it at -125. I think it's shot up now. It's like -150, depending on where you bet. But me and my members locked in a few days ago when I studied this fight at -125. So look, there it is, guys. I've gone over the whole card, at least the segments I do. The most exciting fight on the card, Zhang versus Namajunas. I'm predicting Zhang to win via 4th round TKO. The most inaccurate betting line on the card, Zhu Rong versus Rodrigo Vargas. I'm betting Vargas at +200. I'm calling it a 50-50 fight. So my prediction is 50-50, which means I don't have any prediction. But there we go. That's my prediction, is you should bet on a +200 line if it's 50-50. And the main event, Usman versus Masvidal. Usman is -400. There's probably some value on the money line. He probably should be -500, -600. And I'm gonna say my final prediction is Kamaru Usman wins via decision. So that's it, guys. Thank you for tuning in to the Lucrative MMA Betting Podcast. I will catch up with the chat quickly before I finish. But for those of you listening to the podcast on any podcast platforms or listening to a replay on YouTube, I appreciate you listening to it, and I will be back next week with another edition. If you want to sign up to my service, as I say, we're in crazy profits this year, +24 units already. We won over 60 units last year, 99 units the year before. You can make a second income betting on MMA. And if you want to find out more about me and my service, go to lucrativemmabetting.com and you'll find all the information on there. For now, thanks for listening, and I will see you next week. Good luck on all your bets. All right, I'll just quickly hit the chat up now. Okay, Anaconda saying Rose damaged nose is going to be a factor. Yeah, it could be, man. It was leaking in that last round against Andrade. So that's the thing. You know, what I said is like, and thanks for being there, Anaconda. Shout out to you. Yeah, like what I said is that Rose, Zhang is probably going to win the optics battle in every single one of her fights. And, Rose, we have seen her nose get damaged, and recently it might be an issue for her. So, yeah, that definitely could happen. Zhang 2.0 is coming. Man, after that 5 rounds experience, we probably will see a better Zhang here. I mean, I'd be shocked to see a worse Zhang. Anaconda saying potential for debut jitters. That was Zhu Rong. Still a 21-year-old kid in front of what's going to be an obnoxious Florida crowd. Oh yeah, the crowds. I didn't talk about that, but I do want to talk about Zhu Rong being 21 because I don't know about all that, man. I'm going to bring up my screen and I'll show you a picture of Zhu Rong, and you want to tell me if he's 21, mate. They say Yadong Song is 24, and I don't know about that. Okay, so if this guy's all right, we're going to work this out live on air, yeah? This guy's 21 years old, 21, right? By the way, I was looking up Zhu Rong somewhere else, and it said he was like 22. So Tapology's saying 21. His date of birth is the year 2000. This is complete bullshit. He's had 20 fights, yeah, and he's 21. So we're going to go to his debut, and we're going to see how old he was in his debut. Because if he's had 20 fights, I'm assuming that his debut is probably, I mean, it's not 2 years ago, right? It wasn't when he was 18. His debut is probably going to be at least 5 years ago. So they're going to say that he had a debut at 16. It's possible, but I'm just going to share my screen for you guys, and you can see exactly what I mean. Because I want you to tell me if this guy looks 21. Maybe he's just got an old face, man. Who knows? Genetics is a big thing. Some people do look older, but this guy's not 21, man. All right, let's go to his debut, yeah? So he's born, wait there, let's get his date of birth. His date of birth is, that's American date. I don't even know what that means. 2000 of, is that March? March or July, one of them, yeah? Whatever. I always forget that because it's the wrong way around. All right. Anyway, he's born in 2000, right? So his debut was 2016. Okay, so he debuted at 16. Look, it's possible. It is possible. There's no amateur fights there, though. It is possible he made his MMA debut at 16, but man, what? So he made his MMA debut at 16, and this is what I was saying about the regional scene. Look at this. He made his debut in March 2016. Then he had his next fight in April 2016. Then May 2016. Then July 2016. So you see what I'm saying? These fighters fight like once a month, once every 2 months on the Chinese regional scene. You don't get that in the American regional scene. So you have to kind of beware when you see huge, huge records like this, 17-3. Anyway, look, he might be 21, but I don't believe it. Let's put it that way. I don't believe it. Oscar Ortega, shout out to you. Usman, yeah, I think so too. Oscar Ortega believes Usman holds Masvidal down for 3 rounds and finds a home for the jab late. That jab's always going to land. That jab is... that jab's gone mainstream since that Gilbert Burns fight, right? What about Chev? Well, I don't break down every fight on the main card, Oscar. So this isn't a main card breakdown. This isn't a card breakdown. This is my podcast, the Lucrative MMA Betting Podcast. And in the podcast, I go over the most exciting fight on the card, the most inaccurate betting line on the card, and the main event. So none of them was the Shevchenko versus Andrade fight, but just candidly, I think Shevchenko is going to put on a clinic here. I believe she's going to have one of her best performances of her career. Andrade is definitely going to bring it, but I think that's going to enable Shevchenko, or it's going to give Shevchenko the opening she needs to put on an absolute clinic. And I can't wait to see her fight. All right, that's it, guys. The chat's done. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I'll be back next week as always. I might do a main card breakdown on this so you can actually see my thoughts on the Shevchenko-Andrade fight, but I'm a little bit busy, so I probably won't do a main card breakdown this week, but we'll see. Good luck on all your bets, and yeah, I hope you cash. We're trying to make it 7 winning weekends out of the last 8, with the only losing weekend being a 0.1 unit of loss. So yeah, I'm just rambling now, so I'm going to cut it off, but thank